The woman standing on the church steps wore a dress mended so many times the original fabric barely showed through the patches, and when she lifted her chin to meet Reverend Carstairs' cold gaze, every person gathered in Kennewick knew they were about to witness something terrible. "I cannot and will not perform this ceremony," the Reverend announced, his voice carrying across the dusty street of the small Washington Territory town. "This woman's past makes her unfit for the sanctity of marriage before God in this congregation." Willa Turner felt the words like a physical blow, though she had expected them. She had known that coming here, trying to start fresh in this settlement near the Columbia River, would eventually lead to this moment. Someone always found out. Someone always whispered the truth about what she had been forced to become during those dark years in Portland after her parents died and left her with nothing but debts and a world that offered women in her position precious few choices. The man beside her, Nathan Brooks, stood 6 feet 4 inches tall with shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his arms, visible beneath rolled shirt sleeves, were corded with muscle earned from years of trapping in the Cascade Mountains. He had come down from his cabin in the high country only 3 weeks ago to trade furs, and he had found Willa working at the general store, trying to make an honest living with hands that trembled whenever men looked at her too long. "Then we will not trouble you further," Nathan said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made several men in the gathered crowd step back. He took Willa's hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they wrapped around hers. "Come." "Wait," Willa whispered, humiliation burning through her chest. "Nathan, I should have told you everything before we came here, before you asked me to marry you. You do not know what I did to survive." He turned to look at her, and his dark eyes held no judgment, only a fierce protectiveness that made her breath catch. "I know you did what you had to do in a world that gives women like you no quarter. I know you are brave and strong and deserving of every happiness, and I know that no man in a building has the right to say who God will or will not bless." The Reverend sputtered. "This is blasphemy. You cannot simply declare yourself married." "I can and I will," Nathan said. He looked at Willa, really looked at her, the way he had been doing since the first moment they met. "Will you come with me? Will you let me take you up into the mountains where the sky is bigger than any church roof and speak our vows where only God can hear?" Tears burned in Willa's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough in her 22 years. "Yes," she said, "yes, I will." They walked away from the church together, past the staring faces of townsfolk who had whispered about her since she arrived 6 months ago. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, looked away in shame. Mr. Cooper, who owned the general store where Willa worked, frowned but said nothing. And Martha Stevens, one of the few women who had shown Willa any kindness, gave her a small nod of encouragement. Nathan's horse, a sturdy gray gelding named Smoke, waited at the hitching post. He had a pack mule tethered beside it, already loaded with supplies. Willa realized with a start that he had prepared for this, had known they might not be welcome in the church, and had made ready to leave immediately. "You planned this," she said as he helped her mount. "I hoped it would not be necessary," he admitted, swinging up behind her with easy grace. "But I have learned that hope and preparation make better companions than hope alone." They rode out of Kennewick as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. The Columbia River glittered to their south, wide and powerful, carrying snowmelt from the mountains toward the distant ocean. The landscape here was high desert, sagebrush, and basalt rock, but Nathan guided them north toward the foothills where pine trees began to appear among the scrub. Willa had never been this far from town. Her life, even in Portland, had been confined to streets and buildings, to walls that felt more like prison bars than shelter. Now the world opened up around her, vast and wild and frightening in its freedom. "How far is your cabin?" she asked as they climbed a narrow trail that wound between ancient pines. 2 days' ride if we push hard," Nathan said, "but we are not going to the cabin, not yet." "Then where?" "You will see." They rode until darkness made the trail too dangerous to follow, then made camp in a small clearing beside a creek that sang over smooth stones. Nathan moved with efficient grace, unsaddling the horse and unloading the mule, building a fire ring with rocks and striking sparks into a nest of dry grass and pine needles until flames caught and grew. Willa helped as best she could, though she knew little about making camp. She had learned many things in Portland, but none of them involved surviving in the wilderness. Nathan never made her feel inadequate for her lack of knowledge. Instead, he showed her how to hobble the animals so they could graze without wandering, how to hang their food supplies high in a tree where bears could not reach, how to arrange their bedrolls near the fire, but not so close that sparks would land on the blankets. "Tell me about your life before," he said as they ate a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and hardtack softened in the bean water. "Not Portland. Before that." Willa looked into the fire, watching flames dance across the wood. "I grew up in Salem. My father was a saddle maker, very skilled. My mother took in sewing. We were not wealthy, but we had enough. They taught me to read and write, which was more than many girls received. I was happy." "What happened?" "Cholera came through in the summer of 1873. I was 17. They both died within 3 days of each other." Her voice remained steady, though the memory still carried sharp edges. "I discovered my father had borrowed heavily to expand his business, and his creditors wanted immediate payment. Everything we owned went to settle the debts, but it was not enough. A man named Horace Pemberton paid the remainder in exchange for my agreement to work in his establishment in Portland." Nathan's jaw tightened. "He bought you." He called it an employment contract, but yes, that is what it amounted to. Willa met his eyes. "I told myself I would do it for 1 year, save every penny I could, and then leave. But Pemberton charged us for everything: our rooms, our food, our clothes. The debt never decreased, it only grew. By the time I finally escaped, 4 years had passed. I had nothing but the dress on my back and enough coins hidden in my hem to buy a stagecoach ticket east. I chose Kennewick because it was small and far from Portland, and I thought maybe, finally, I could disappear into a quiet life." "You did not disappear," Nathan said. "You shone like a candle in a dark room the moment I walked into Cooper's store." Despite everything, Willa felt warmth spread through her chest. "You asked me about the different types of flour for 20 minutes. I knew you did not care about flour." "I care about flour," he protested, but his eyes held humor. "I simply also cared about hearing your voice and watching the way you smiled when you explained the difference between wheat and rye." "Why me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You are a good man, Nathan, strong and capable and kind. You could have any woman you wanted. Why choose someone with my past?" He set down his plate and moved closer, taking her hands in his. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the earnestness in his expression. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who survived things that would have broken most people. I see someone who kept their humanity and kindness despite every reason to become hard and bitter. I see someone brave enough to start over in a strange place with nothing to support them. And I see someone who makes me want to be better than I am." Tears did fall then, tracking hot lines down Willa's cheeks. "I do not know how to be a wife, not a real wife, the kind a man like you deserves." "Then we will learn together," Nathan said simply. He reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumbs. "I have been alone in these mountains for 7 years, Willa. I came west after my family died in a fire back in Missouri. I was 19, angry at God and the world, wanting nothing but solitude and silence. I built my cabin and my traps, and I told myself I was content. But I was just hiding, the same as you were hiding in Kennewick. We are both ready to stop hiding now." She leaned into his touch, feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, we are." They sat together by the fire as stars emerged overhead, brilliant and countless in the clear mountain air. Nathan told her about his life in the high country, about tracking lynx and beaver through snow that came up to his waist, about the cabin he had built log by log with his own hands, about the long, silent winters when the only sounds were wind and the crack of freezing trees. Willa listened, imagining this new life spreading out before her like an unwritten page. When the fire burned low, they lay down in separate bedrolls, maintaining the propriety they would honor until they spoke their vows. But Nathan kept his bedroll close enough that Willa could hear him breathing, could feel his presence like a shield between her and the darkness. "Nathan," she said softly. "Yes? Thank you for seeing me. The real me. not what I was forced to be. Always, he promised. They woke with dawn, when the sky turned the color of rose petals and birds began their morning songs. Nathan rekindled the fire and made coffee in a battered pot, the smell rich and welcome in the cool air. They ate more hardtack and some dried apples, then packed up camp with growing efficiency as Willa learned the rhythm of travel. The trail led them higher into the Cascade foothills, through forests of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir that rose like cathedral pillars toward the sky. Willa had never imagined such trees, such silence broken only by wind and birdsong and the steady clop of hooves on packed earth. The world she had known in Salem and Portland had been noisy and crowded, full of human voices and wagon wheels and industry. This was different, older, touched by something that made her feel very small and somehow held at the same time. "Are there truly bears here?" she asked as they followed a ridgeline that offered views of distant snow-capped peaks. "Black bears, yes. They usually avoid people, but we still take precautions. Grizzlies are rarer in these parts, but they exist further north and in the high country." Nathan glanced back at her. "Are you frightened?" "A little," she admitted, "but less than I would have expected. The dangers here are honest, at least. A bear is a bear. It does not pretend to be your friend while taking everything you have." Understanding flickered in his eyes. No. Nature can be harsh, but it is never cruel. Cruelty requires intention. By midday, they reached a high meadow carpeted in wildflowers that turned the ground into a tapestry of purple lupin, yellow balsam root, and red paintbrush. A creek ran through the center, feeding a small pool so clear Willa could see smooth stones on the bottom. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still white with snow despite the June warmth. Nathan dismounted and helped Willa down, his hands steady at her waist. "This is the place," he said. "It is beautiful," Willa breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "This meadow has been special to me since I first found it 5 years ago. I have never brought another person here." He took both her hands, drawing her attention back to him. "Willa Turner, I want to speak our vows in this place, with these mountains as witnesses and that sky as our roof. Will you marry me here, before God and creation, and trust that our union is as real and binding as any ceremony in any church?" Her heart felt too large for her chest. "I will." They stood facing each other in the center of the meadow, with wildflowers brushing their legs and sunlight pouring down like a benediction. Nathan still wore his work clothes, canvas pants, and a homespun shirt, but he had removed his hat and his dark hair moved gently in the mountain breeze. Willa wore her mended dress, but she had woven a crown of lupin flowers that morning, and Nathan had placed it carefully on her head, his fingers lingering against her hair. "I do not know the formal words," Nathan said, "so I will speak from my heart. Willa, I promise to protect you and provide for you and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to honor your past without letting it define your future. I promise to build a home with you where you will always be safe and valued and loved. I promise to be faithful and true until my last breath leaves my body. These things I swear before God and on my life." Willa's voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "Nathan, I promise to be a true partner to you, to learn the skills I need to build this life with you, to bring whatever strength and courage I have to our union. I promise to trust you even when trust is hard for me. I promise to honor you and stand with you and love you with everything I have. These things I swear before God and on my life." Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple band of gold, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring. It is all I have left of my family. I want you to wear it." She held out her left hand, trembling slightly, and he slid the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly, warm against her skin. "Do you have something of yours I could carry?" he asked. Willa thought for a moment, then reached up and unpinned the small brooch at her collar. It was cheap metal, but it had been her mother's, one of the few things she had managed to keep through all the years of loss. "This was my mother's. She wore it every day I knew her." Nathan took it with reverence and pinned it to his shirt, right over his heart. "I will wear it with honor." They stood in silence for a long moment, and Willa felt something shift in the air around them, something that went beyond words or promises. She felt bound to this man now in a way that had nothing to do with laws or papers or the approval of any reverend. This was older and deeper, a covenant made in wild places where the world still remembered what sacred meant. "May I kiss my wife?" Nathan asked softly. "Please," Willa whispered. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and bent to kiss her with a gentleness that made her want to weep. His lips were warm and soft, asking rather than taking, offering comfort and promise and the beginning of something new. Willa kissed him back, pouring into it all the hope and fear and desperate longing she had been carrying for so long. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I already know I will not," she said. They spent the afternoon in the meadow, unhurried now that their vows were spoken. Nathan showed Willa how to identify edible plants, pointing out the young shoots of bracken fern and the roots of camas lilies that could be roasted. He taught her to read animal tracks in the soft earth beside the creek, showing her the delicate prints of deer, the hand-like marks of raccoons, the long furrows left by a badger. Willa absorbed it all eagerly, this knowledge that could keep her alive in this new world. But more than that, she watched the way Nathan moved through this landscape, his confidence and competence, the deep respect he showed for the land and its creatures. This was a man who understood himself and his place in the world, who had found peace in solitude, but was willing to open his life to another. As evening approached, they made camp at the edge of the meadow where a stand of firs provided shelter. Nathan built another fire while Willa gathered more firewood, proud of herself for knowing now what to look for: dry branches that would burn clean rather than green wood that would smoke and hiss. This time, when Nathan spread their bedrolls, he placed them side by side. They were married now, bound together before God and the mountains. Willa felt nervousness flutter in her stomach, but when Nathan lay down beside her and simply pulled her close, tucking her against his broad chest with her head resting over his steady heartbeat, the nervousness faded into something warmer and safer. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he murmured into her hair. "I know your past has likely made intimacy complicated. We have all the time in the world." Relief and gratitude flooded through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I want to be a true wife to you in all ways, but I need time to separate what was forced from what I choose freely." "Then we will take that time." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "For now, I am content to simply hold you and know you are mine, and I am yours." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together under a canopy of stars so thick it looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. Willa slept better than she had in years, dreamless and deep, protected by Nathan's presence in the mountain silence. The next morning they continued their journey, climbing higher into the Cascades. The landscape shifted as they gained elevation, the pines giving way to stands of mountain hemlock and subalpine fir. They crossed snowfields that persisted in the shadowed places, the horses picking their way carefully across the packed white surface. Willa saw her first marmot, the fat rodent whistling alarm from its rocky perch, and Nathan pointed out a golden eagle soaring overhead, its wings spanning wider than she was tall. "How much further?" she asked as they stopped beside a rushing creek to let the animals drink. "We will reach the cabin by nightfall if we maintain pace," Nathan said. He helped her dismount, then caught her hand. "Willa, I need you to understand something before we arrive. The cabin is small and rough. I built it for one person, for survival rather than comfort. It has one room, a dirt floor, and a roof that sometimes leaks. It is not what you deserve." "I have lived in far worse," she assured him, "and unlike those places, I chose this one. That makes all the difference." He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "We will make improvements. I have been saving my earnings from fur sales. We can add a proper floor, maybe build a second room, make it a real home. We will make it a home together," Willa said. "That is what matters." They rode on, and as the sun began its afternoon descent, they crested a final ridge, and Willa saw the cabin below. It sat in a small clearing beside a stream, backed by towering firs, and fronted by a view that stretched for miles across forested mountains. The structure was indeed small, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A lean-to shed stood nearby for storing wood and supplies, and a small corral held a pair of mules. "The mules are my pack animals," Nathan explained as they descended toward the cabin. "I use them to haul furs and supplies. The gray is named Gus, and the brown is Molly." As they entered the clearing, both mules lifted their heads and brayed greeting. Nathan called back, a sound somewhere between a shout and a bray that made Willa laugh despite herself. The sound of her laughter seemed to surprise them both, and Nathan grinned. "It is good to hear you laugh," he said. "I had almost forgotten how," Willa admitted. The cabin's interior was exactly as Nathan had described, small, dim, and functional. But it was also clean and well organized. A narrow bed frame held a thick mattress stuffed with what smelled like pine needles and dried grass. A table and 2 chairs occupied one corner, while the other held a small cook stove fashioned from an old barrel. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment in careful order. Furs hung from the rafters, beaver and mink and fox waiting to be traded. "I know it is not much," Nathan began, but Willa turned and took his hands. "It is honest work and a roof over our heads, and more than that, it is ours," she said firmly. "Do not apologize for what you have built here. It is remarkable." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You are remarkable, Willa Brooks." The name struck her. She was Willa Brooks now, no longer Willa Turner. She had a new name to go with her new life, another layer of distance from the woman she had been forced to be in Portland. They spent the remaining daylight settling in. Nathan showed Willa where he kept various supplies, how to work the stove, where the best water could be drawn from the stream. He took her to see the small root cellar he had dug into the hillside behind the cabin, its cool darkness perfect for storing vegetables and meat. He pointed out his trap lines, the trails he followed through the forest in search of furs. "Winter is the best season for trapping," he explained as they walked back toward the cabin in the gathering dusk. "The furs are thickest then, most valuable, but it is also the hardest time. We can be snowed in for weeks at a stretch. I need to make sure we have enough supplies laid in before the first big storm hits, usually in late October or early November." "What do you do with all the time when you are snowed in?" Willa asked, trying to imagine weeks trapped in that small cabin. Nathan glanced at her, and she saw heat in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I'm sure we will find ways to occupy ourselves." That night they ate a better meal than they had managed on the trail: venison stew with wild onions and herbs, biscuits cooked in the barrel stove, coffee sweetened with a precious spoonful of sugar. Willa marveled at Nathan's cooking skills, another thing he had learned in his years alone. When darkness fell fully, they prepared for bed. The cabin had no separate spaces, no privacy. They would share that single bed, their first night truly alone together as husband and wife. Willa felt her nervousness return, but Nathan sensed it immediately. "Would you like me to sleep on the floor?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I want you beside me. I just need you to be patient." "Always," he promised. They lay down together in the narrow bed, and there was no way to avoid touching given the limited space. Nathan curved his large body around hers, one arm draped protectively over her waist. Willa could feel the solid warmth of him all along her back, the rise and fall of his breathing, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the first moment. "Tell me about tomorrow," she said softly. "What will we do?" "Tomorrow I will show you how to fire a rifle, in case you ever need to defend yourself or hunt for food. Then we will begin teaching you to fish. The stream here is full of trout. In the afternoon, perhaps we will start planning improvements to the cabin." His breath stirred her hair. "And every day after that, we will build this life together, one piece at a time." Willa turned in his arms so she could see his face in the dimness. "I'm going to make you happy, Nathan. I promise I will be a good wife to you." "You already make me happy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just being here, choosing this life with me, that is more than I ever expected to have." She kissed him then, slow and sweet, and felt his arms tighten around her. The kiss deepened, and Willa felt heat building in her core, a warmth that was entirely different from anything she had experienced in Portland. This was desire she chose, passion that belonged to her, and this man she had married under the open sky. When Nathan's hands moved to the buttons of her dress, she did not stop him. When he pulled back to look at her, question clear in his eyes, she nodded. "I choose this," she whispered. "I choose you." They came together in that narrow bed with a tenderness that brought tears to Willa's eyes. Nathan took his time, patient and gentle, making sure every touch brought her pleasure rather than pain or obligation. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, murmuring endearments against her skin, showing her what intimacy could be when it was given freely between two people who cared for each other. Afterward, Willa lay with her head on Nathan's broad chest, feeling more whole than she had since before her parents died. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing me the difference between taking and giving, for making this beautiful instead of something to endure." His arms tightened around her. "It will always be beautiful between us. This, I promise you." They fell asleep wrapped together, and when Willa woke in the deep night to find Nathan still holding her, still present and protective even in sleep, she finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, possibly, she was safe now. Maybe this could really be her life, this cabin, this mountain, this man who had married her under God's open sky when no preacher would speak the words. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Willa embraced eagerly. Each morning she and Nathan would rise with the sun, build up the fire, and make breakfast together. Then came the day's lessons and tasks. True to his word, Nathan taught her to shoot, first with a lighter rifle and then graduating to his heavier sharps. Willa discovered she had a good eye and steady hands, and the first time she hit a target at 50 yards, Nathan whooped with pride. She learned to fish with both pole and net, to clean and gut her catch, to smoke the meat so it would keep. She learned to identify more edible plants, to forage for mushrooms and berries, to dig roots. Nathan showed her how to preserve food for winter, drying berries and meat, storing root vegetables in the cellar, even making a simple sauerkraut from wild cabbage. In turn, Willa taught Nathan some of the skills her mother had passed to her. She mended his worn clothing with neat, strong stitches. She showed him how to make soap from wood ash and animal fat, a vast improvement over the harsh lye soap he had been using. She organized the cabin more efficiently, creating a sense of home from the rough bachelor quarters. They worked together to improve the cabin itself. Nathan cut and shaped logs while Willa helped him fit them together, building a small addition that would serve as a proper bedroom, giving them more space and privacy. They dug up the dirt floor in the main room and laid down planks Nathan had been saving for years, transforming the cabin's interior. Through it all, they talked. Nathan told her about his childhood in Missouri, about parents who had loved him fiercely and siblings who had died too young in the fire that took his family. He spoke of his grief and his anger and how the mountains had slowly healed him. Willa told him about her life in Salem, the happiness she had known before cholera took her parents, the terror and shame of her years in Portland. She cried sometimes as she spoke, and Nathan held her and never made her feel weak for her tears. Their physical relationship deepened and grew sweeter. Nathan continued to show Willa that intimacy could be about connection and joy rather than transaction and duty. She learned what pleased him and discovered her own desires, finding freedom in the knowledge that her body belonged to herself, and she could choose to share it with this man who loved her. August arrived hot and dry, the mountain meadows turning golden brown and the stream running lower in its bed. Nathan spent long hours checking and repairing his trap lines, preparing for the coming season. Willa worked on the garden they had planted in June, coaxing vegetables from the thin mountain soil, potatoes and carrots and hardy greens that could tolerate the short growing season. One afternoon, as Willa worked in the garden, she heard voices on the trail, a rare occurrence in this remote place. She stood, shading her eyes, and saw Nathan emerge from the tree line accompanied by two men she did not know. Both were dressed in buckskins and furs like Nathan, clearly mountain men themselves. "Willa," Nathan called out, "these are friends of mine, James Crawford and his partner, a Chinook man named Bear." The men approached, and Willa saw curiosity in their eyes, but no judgment. James was perhaps 40, weathered and lean, with a grizzled beard. Bear was younger, maybe 30, with strong features and long dark hair bound with leather cord. Both nodded respectfully to her. "Madam," James said, "Nathan mentioned he had gotten himself married. We wanted to come by and offer congratulations." "And see if it was true," Bear added with a slight smile. "Nathan has been alone up here so long, we thought maybe the isolation had made him imagine a wife." Despite her nervousness around strangers, Willa found herself smiling. "I assure you, I am quite real." They shared a meal together, and Willa listened as the three men talked about trap lines and fur prices, and which areas had seen the most game that summer. She learned that James and Bear operated from a cabin 2 days north, that they had been partners for 10 years, that they made the journey down to Fort Vancouver once a year to sell their furs and resupply. "You should come with us this year," James suggested to Nathan. "Prices have been good, and you have a wife to provide for now. Might be worth taking your whole winter's catch down rather than trading to middlemen." Nathan glanced at Willa. It would mean a month away, 2 weeks' travel each direction, but he is right about the prices. "When would you leave?" Willa asked. "Late March usually, after the thaw, but before the trails get too muddy." "That is months away," Willa said. "We can discuss it when the time comes." The visitors stayed the night, sleeping in their own bedrolls outside, and left the next morning with promises to check on them again before winter set in. After they departed, Nathan pulled Willa into his arms. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being gracious to my friends, for not minding the intrusion, for understanding that even mountain men need some company now and then." "They are good men," Willa said. "I'm glad you have friends up here. I worried you might be as isolated as you claimed." "James and Bear are the only people I see most years, aside from brief trips to town," Nathan admitted. "But knowing they are relatively close, that we can help each other if needed, makes the winters less daunting." September brought the first hints of autumn, cool mornings and leaves beginning to turn gold and red. Nathan increased his preparations for winter, cutting and stacking massive amounts of firewood, hunting elk and deer to smoke and preserve, checking every inch of the cabin for gaps that would need to be sealed against the cold. Willa helped with all of it, her hands growing calloused and strong, her body lean and capable from the physical labor. She also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly amidst monthly bleeding, nausea in the mornings, a tenderness in her breasts. At first she did not trust it, could not quite believe her body was capable of creating life after everything it had endured. But as the signs continued, certainty grew. She told Nathan one evening as they sat outside watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. "I'm carrying your child," she said softly. Nathan went very still beside her. Then he turned to look at her, and she saw wonder and joy and something like fear in his expression. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor to confirm it. But yes, I believe so." He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Willa ran her fingers through his long hair, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. "Are you happy?" He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "Happy does not begin to cover what I feel. Terrified, awed, grateful, and yes, happier than I knew I could be." He paused. "Are you happy? I know this complicates things, especially in your first year up here, learning to survive." "I am happy," Willa said, and realized it was true. "I never thought I would have children, never thought I deserved them after everything. But this baby was made from love, not from what I was forced to do. This baby is proof that my past does not have to define my future." Nathan rose and gathered her into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "I will take care of you both. I swear it." "I know," Willa said. "I trust you." The knowledge of the baby changed things, made Nathan even more determined to prepare for winter. He would not risk Willa's health or the child's. He made one more trip down to Kennewick for additional supplies, though he avoided the town itself and instead traded with a settler who lived several miles outside of it. He returned with flour and sugar, coffee and tea, fabric for making baby clothes, and a precious bottle of laudanum in case Willa needed it during the birth. October arrived with the first real frost, turning the world silver in the mornings. The aspens blazed gold against the dark evergreens, and elk bugled in the high country, their eerie calls echoing across the mountains. Nathan taught Willa to render fat into tallow for candles, to make stew from every part of an animal, to stretch their supplies through the long months ahead. She was showing now, a small roundness to her belly that made Nathan smile every time he looked at her. He had taken to talking to the baby through her stomach, telling it stories about the mountains and promising it all manner of adventures once it was born. Willa would rest her hand over his and feel more content than she had imagined possible. The first snow came in mid-October, just a dusting that melted by afternoon. But it was a warning. Winter was coming, and once it arrived in earnest, they would be isolated until spring. "Are you frightened?" Nathan asked as they watched the snow fall. A little," Willa admitted. "What if something goes wrong with the baby? What if I need help and there's none to be had?" "Women have been birthing babies in remote places since the beginning of time," Nathan said gently. "You are strong and healthy, and I have helped deliver foals and calves enough times to have some idea what to do. We will manage." He turned her to face him. "But if you would rather, we could leave now. Travel down to Kennewick or even Portland, find you a place to stay until the baby is born." "No," Willa said immediately. "I am not going back to Portland, and I am not giving the people of Kennewick the satisfaction of seeing me dependent on their charity. We stay here. This is our home." Pride shone in Nathan's eyes. "Then we stay." The real snow came in early November, a storm that dropped 3 feet in 2 days and transformed the world into something alien and beautiful. Willa stood at the cabin window, watching the white cascade down, and felt a moment of pure awe. She had never seen snow like this, never understood how it could change everything, muffling sound and blanketing the world in pristine silence. Nathan took it in stride, this storm that would have terrified Willa if she had been alone. He had prepared well. They had months' worth of food stored away, wood stacked higher than Willa's head, the cabin sealed tight against the cold. He showed her how to navigate in the deep snow, using snowshoes he had crafted from bent wood and rawhide. He taught her to watch for signs of avalanche danger, to test the depth and stability of snow before trusting her weight to it. They settled into their winter routine, and Willa discovered she did not mind the isolation. The cabin felt cozy rather than confining, warmed by the fire and by Nathan's presence. They spent long evenings reading aloud from the handful of books Nathan owned, playing cards, working on small projects. Nathan carved a cradle from pine, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he shaped the wood. Willa sewed baby clothes from the fabric he had brought back, her needle flashing in the firelight. Sometimes Nathan would play a battered harmonica he pulled from his pack, filling the cabin with simple melodies that made Willa's heart ache with their beauty. She would sing along when she knew the songs, her voice soft but true, and Nathan would smile at her like she had given him a precious gift. They made love frequently in the enforced intimacy of the winter cabin, learning each other's bodies with the thoroughness that came from time and attention. Nathan was endlessly careful of her pregnant body, adjusting positions and checking constantly that she was comfortable. Willa felt beautiful in those moments, despite her changing shape, because Nathan looked at her like she was the most desirable woman in the world. Christmas came, and they celebrated simply. Nathan had shot a grouse the week before and saved it for their Christmas dinner. They made a small pudding from dried berries and precious sugar. Willa gave Nathan a shirt she had sewn in secret, working on it only when he was outside checking the trap lines. Nathan gave Willa a set of carved hair combs he had made from antler, polished smooth and etched with delicate designs of pine trees and mountains. "I love you," Willa said as she held the combs, knowing they represented hours of work in the dim winter light. "I love you too," Nathan replied, "more than I thought possible." January and February passed in a blur of white. The snow piled higher, 6 feet in the clearing and much deeper where it drifted against the cabin walls. Nathan dug tunnels through it to reach the wood pile and the lean to where the animals sheltered. Occasionally he would strap on his snowshoes and check his nearest trap lines, but he never went far or stayed long. Keeping Willa safe and the cabin running took priority over furs. Willa's belly grew round and prominent. The baby kicked often now, strong thumps that Nathan loved to feel with his hand pressed against her stomach. They discussed names, endlessly traditional names, names from their families, names that meant something special. But they could not seem to agree on anything, and finally decided they would know when they met the child. "What if the baby comes early?" Willa asked one night in late February as a storm howled outside. "What if it is too hard? What if I cannot do this?" Nathan pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "You are the bravest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed most people, and you came out the other side still kind and still hoping. Birthing this baby will be hard, but you will do it, and I will be right beside you through all of it. Promise? I promise on everything I hold sacred." March arrived with warmer days that began the slow process of melting the massive snowpack. The baby was due in early May based on Willa's calculations, which meant she would give birth well before Nathan would even consider the journey to Fort Vancouver with James and Bear. He had already told them he would not be making the trip this year, that his place was with his wife. But in the second week of March, Willa went into labor 6 weeks early. It started with cramping in the middle of the night, pain that woke her from sleep with a gasp. Nathan was instantly alert beside her. "What is wrong?" "I do not know. Pain, low in my belly." Another cramp seized her, stronger this time, and Willa clutched at Nathan's arm. "Something is wrong. The baby is not due for weeks yet." Nathan lit a lamp with shaking hands, and in the golden light, Willa saw fear in his eyes that mirrored her own, but his voice remained steady. "Babies come when they are ready, not always when we expect them. We are going to be fine. I am going to help you through this." The labor progressed quickly, too quickly for a first birth. Willa had heard stories from the other women in Portland about labors that lasted a day or more, but her body seemed determined to expel this child as rapidly as possible. The pain was enormous, all-consuming, waves of agony that made her scream into the wadded fabric Nathan gave her to muffle the sound. He stayed calm through it all, even as Willa could see terror lurking behind his eyes. He heated water and found the clean cloths they had prepared. He helped her into the position that felt most comfortable, supporting her weight when she needed to squat, rubbing her back when the contractions came crashing over her. He murmured encouragement, even when Willa cursed him and this baby and the entire situation. As dawnlight began to seep through the cabin windows, Willa felt the overwhelming urge to push. Nathan positioned himself to catch the baby, and with 3 agonizing pushes that tore a final scream from Willa's throat, their son slipped into the world. For a terrible moment, the baby did not cry. Nathan worked quickly, clearing the infant's mouth and nose, rubbing the tiny chest with a cloth. And then, blessedly, a thin wail filled the cabin. "He is breathing," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "Willa, he is breathing." He placed the baby on Willa's chest, and she looked down at the impossibly small creature with his wrinkled red face and shock of dark hair. He was tiny, far tinier than he should be, barely the length of her forearm. His eyes were squeezed shut and his fists waved in protest at this strange new world. "Hello?" Willa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one." Nathan dealt with the afterbirth efficiently, then cleaned up mother and baby with gentle hands. He wrapped the infant in the softest flannel they had and helped Willa settle back against pillows, the baby cradled in her arms. "He is so small," Willa said, fear creeping into her voice. "Nathan, he is too small." "He is early," Nathan agreed, "but he is breathing well, and his color is good. Small babies can survive, Willa. We will keep him warm and fed, and we will give him every chance." The baby started rooting against Willa's chest, instinct driving him to seek food. Willa fumbled with her nightgown and managed to get him to latch onto her breast. The sensation was strange and slightly painful, but when the baby began to suckle, relief flooded through her. He was feeding. That was a good sign. They named him Noah, after Nathan's father, Benjamin as a middle name after Willa's. Noah Benjamin Brooks, born too early in a cabin in the Cascade Mountains with only his parents to welcome him into the world. The first week was terrifying. Noah was so tiny and fragile, his cries weak and mewling. Willa barely slept, waking every time the baby stirred, checking constantly that he was still breathing. Nathan was equally vigilant, taking turns with Willa to hold and watch over their son. But slowly, miraculously, Noah began to strengthen. He nursed more vigorously. His cries grew louder. The wrinkled, alien look of his newborn face softened into something more human, more beautiful. By the end of the second week, Nathan declared that he thought Noah would survive. "He is a fighter," Nathan said, holding his son with infinite care in his large hands, like his mother. Willa watched her husband with their child and felt her heart overflow. This man who had been alone in the mountains for so many years, who had married her when no one else would, who had loved her despite her past, he was a wonderful father, patient and gentle and utterly devoted to this tiny scrap of humanity they had created together. Spring arrived in earnest, the snow melting rapidly and turning the streams into roaring torrents. Green returned to the world, new grass and unfurling leaves, wildflowers pushing up through the damp earth. James and Bear stopped by on their way to Fort Vancouver, and Nathan asked them to spread word if they encountered anyone who knew him. He and Willa had a son, and they were doing well. Summer was glorious. Noah grew stronger and bigger, thriving despite his rough start. Willa recovered her strength and returned to work, though Nathan insisted she take things slowly. They fell into a new rhythm, this life with a baby woven into it. Noah spent much of his time in a sling against Willa's chest as she worked, learning the world through touch and sound and his mother's heartbeat. Nathan was a besotted father. He would talk to Noah for hours, explaining everything they were doing, describing the mountains and the animals and the changing seasons. He carved toys for the baby, smooth wooden animals, and rattles that Noah grasped with surprising strength. In the evenings he would sing to his son, old songs his own father had sung to him, his rough voice surprisingly tender. Willa often found herself just watching them, her heart almost too full to contain the love she felt. She had come so far from that woman standing on the church steps in Kennewick, humiliated and certain she would never deserve happiness. Nathan had shown her otherwise. He had given her this life, this home, this family. One afternoon in late July, as Willa worked in the garden with Noah napping in a basket beside her, she heard horses on the trail. She looked up, shading her eyes, and froze. Reverend Carstairs rode into the clearing, accompanied by two men from Kennewick that Willa recognized. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What were they doing here? How had they even found this place? Nathan emerged from the trees, his rifle in his hands, though not yet raised. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cool, "you are a long way from town." Reverend Carstairs dismounted, and Willa was struck by how much older he looked. "Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Brooks, I've come to apologize." Willa stood slowly, positioning herself between the visitors and her sleeping son. "Apologize? For my actions last year, for refusing to marry you, for humiliating you publicly." The Reverend looked at the ground, his weathered face creased with shame. "I have spent the past year wrestling with my conscience and my God, and I have come to understand that I was wrong, profoundly wrong." Nathan moved to stand beside Willa, and she felt strength radiating from him. What brought about this change of heart? One of the other men stepped forward, Mr. Cooper from the general store. "Martha Stevens died 3 months ago," he said quietly. "She took a fever and it carried her off in less than a week. Before she passed, she gave the Reverend a piece of her mind about how he had treated Mrs. Brooks, told him that if anyone understood God's grace, it should be a preacher, and that turning away someone seeking to start a new life was about as far from Christian behavior as a person could get." "Martha," Willa whispered, the kind woman who had shown her gentleness in Kennewick, who had nodded encouragement as Willa and Nathan walked away from the church. "She was right," Reverend Carstairs said, finally meeting Willa's eyes. "I let judgment and self-righteousness guide me instead of compassion. You came to me seeking God's blessing on your union, and I turned you away because I deemed you unworthy. But no one is unworthy of grace. That is the entire point of grace." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "We did not need your blessing. Nathan married me under God's open sky, and that was worth more than any words you could have spoken in your church." "I know," the Reverend said, "and I am not here to suggest otherwise. I simply came to tell you I was wrong and to ask your forgiveness. What you choose to do with that request is entirely up to you." Noah woke then and began to fuss. Willa bent to lift him from the basket, cradling him against her shoulder. The 3 men from Kennewick stared at the baby with obvious surprise. "You have a child," Mr. Cooper said. "We do," Nathan confirmed, moving to put his arm around Willa. "Our son, Noah, he was born in March." Reverend Carstairs gazed at the small family, and Willa saw genuine regret in his expression. "You have built something good here, something real. I'm sorry I was not wise enough to see that you deserved support rather than condemnation." Willa looked up at Nathan, and he nodded slightly, letting her make this choice. She took a breath. "I appreciate your apology, Reverend. I will not say the pain of that day has completely faded, because it has not, but I also will not hold on to bitterness. You have traveled a long way to say these words, and that shows character." "I forgive you." Relief washed over the Reverend's face. "Thank you. And if you would ever like to have your union blessed in a proper ceremony, I would be honored to perform it." "We are already blessed," Nathan said firmly. "By these mountains, by each other, and by this child. We need nothing more." The men from Kennewick stayed only long enough to rest their horses and accept water for their journey back. Before they left, Mr. Cooper pulled a small package from his saddlebag. "This is from the women of the town," he said, handing it to Willa. "Martha organized it before she died. They made some things for the baby, though they did not know if you had a boy or girl." Willa unwrapped the package with shaking hands and found tiny knitted booties, soft blankets, a beautifully embroidered gown. Tears did fall then, for the kindness of women she barely knew, for Martha who had defended her even on her deathbed. "Thank you," she managed. "Please tell them thank you." After the men departed, Willa and Nathan stood together watching them disappear down the trail. Noah had fallen asleep again, his small, warm weight a comfort against Willa's chest. "Do you regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. "Not having a church wedding?" "Not for a single moment," Willa said. She turned to face him, going up on her toes to kiss him softly. "You gave me something better than a church wedding. You gave me freedom and choice and love without conditions. That meadow where we spoke our vows will always be more sacred to me than any building." Nathan gathered her and Noah both into his arms. "I love you, Willa Brooks." "I love you too," she said against his chest, "more than I can ever express." The years that followed were not always easy. Life in the mountains never was. But they were good years, full of love and hard work, and the deep satisfaction that came from building something real together. Noah grew into a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's quick smile. He learned to walk on trails steep enough to terrify visiting mothers, and by the time he was 5, he could identify every major tree and animal in the region. When Noah was 2, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, for the grace neither of them had expected to receive, but which had transformed their lives. Grace had Willa's auburn hair and Nathan's serious eyes, and she was as tough as her older brother from the first moment she entered the world, screaming protest at the cold mountain air. Nathan expanded the cabin again, adding a loft where the children would sleep once they were old enough. They built a proper barn for the horses and mules, a chicken coop that provided eggs year-round, even a small workshop where Nathan taught Noah to carve and build. The cabin became a home, solid and weathered and filled with the evidence of their life together. Nathan's furs hanging from the rafters, Willa's herb bundles drying above the stove, the children's toys scattered across the plank floor. They made the journey down to Fort Vancouver when the children were old enough to travel, trading furs and purchasing supplies, seeing the wider world in small doses. But they always returned to their mountain with relief, grateful for the silence and solitude and the life they had carved from this wild place. Occasionally, people from Kennewick would visit. Martha's widower came once with his sons to pay respects, and Mr. Cooper stopped by every few years with news from town. The reverend never returned, but he sent word through others that he continued to pray for their family, and Willa found she no longer held any bitterness toward him. That day on the church steps, which had seemed like the worst moment of her life, had actually been the moment everything changed for the better. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Willa back to the meadow where they had spoken their vows. It was summer, and the wildflowers bloomed in the same glorious profusion as they had that day a decade earlier. Grace and Noah stayed at the cabin under the watchful eye of Bear, who had become something like an uncle to the children. They walked through the meadow hand in hand, and Willa felt like she was 19 again, standing here with this man and choosing to trust him with her future. "Do you remember what I promised you?" Nathan asked as they reached the center of the meadow. "You promised to protect me and provide for me and stand beside me through whatever came," Willa recited. "You promised to honor my past without letting it define my future. You promised to build a home where I would always be safe and valued and loved. And have I kept those promises?" "Every single one," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion, "every day for 10 years. Then I want to make new promises," Nathan said. He took both her hands just as he had that day so long ago. "I promise to continue loving you for all the years we have remaining. I promise to be the best father I can be to our children and any others we might have. I promise to never take for granted the gift of this life we have built together. And I promise that when we are old and gray, I will still look at you and see the woman who was brave enough to walk away from that church and marry me under God's open sky." tears streamed down Willa's face. I promise to love you just as fiercely. I promise to be grateful every day for the man who saw me when I felt invisible, who valued me when I felt worthless, who loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I promise to fill our home with warmth and our children with strength. And I promise that you will never, ever regret the choice you made to marry me. I could never regret it. Ha! Nathan said hoarsely. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They kissed in that meadow as the sun painted the mountains gold and the wildflowers swayed in the breeze. And Willa thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the loss and pain and humiliation. Yes, but also the courage and hope and love that had transformed everything. She had been the woman no preacher would marry, too stained by the past to deserve a future. But Nathan had seen deeper, had understood that her past was something that happened to her, not something that defined her worth. He had given her vows under the vast Montana sky, had built her a home in the mountains, had loved her with a constancy that never wavered. They walked back to the cabin as evening fell, emerging from the trees to see lamplight glowing in the windows and their children's laughter carrying on the still air. This was her life now, this home, this family, this love that had redeemed her in ways no church service ever could. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. Noah grew into a young man who had his father's strength and his mother's compassion, who could track a deer through snow that left no obvious prints, and who treated every living thing with respect. Grace developed her mother's skill with needle and thread, but also her father's love of the wilderness, equally comfortable sewing a dress or skinning a rabbit. When Willa was 38, she gave birth to their final child, a boy they named Samuel. He arrived during a spring storm, his first sounds mixing with the thunder that rolled across the peaks. Nathan held him up to the window after Willa had recovered, showing the infant the lightning that split the sky. Your son was born during a storm, Nathan told Willa as she dozed in their bed. I think that means he's going to be wild. All our children are wild, Willa murmured with a smile. They are mountain children. How could they be anything else? Samuel proved his father right, growing into a boy who climbed higher and explored further than either of his siblings had dared. He gave Willa more gray hairs than the other two combined, but he also filled their home with joy and laughter and the kind of fearless enthusiasm that reminded her why she had chosen this life. Nathan's hair went silver at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting into mountain sun and wind. But he remained strong and vital, still trapping in winter, still providing for his family with the same steady competence he had always shown. He taught Noah the secrets of his trap lines, preparing his eldest son to take over someday, but he also encouraged the boy to find his own path. Willa grew older too, her hands permanently calloused from work, her skin weathered by mountain weather, but she had never been happier. The frightened, broken woman who had fled Portland no longer existed. In her place stood someone strong and capable, a woman who could birth babies and shoot rifles and survive winter storms, a woman who knew her own worth and never doubted her place in the world. They made the journey to Kennewick occasionally, though the town held little interest for them beyond practical supplies. On one such trip, when Willa was 43, they learned that Reverend Carstairs had died the previous winter. He had left a letter for them with Mr. Cooper, who handed it over with solemn ceremony. Back in their cabin that night, Willa opened the letter and read it aloud by lamplight while Nathan and the children listened. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, she read, if you are reading this, I have gone to stand before God and account for my actions in this life. I hope He is more merciful in His judgment than I was in mine. I wanted you to know that your forgiveness, Mrs. Brooks, was one of the greatest gifts I ever received. It taught me more about grace than all my years of preaching. You showed me that God's love is bigger than our ability to limit it, and that redemption comes not through condemnation, but through acceptance and love. You built a good life together, you and Mr. Brooks, and you raised your children to be strong and kind. You proved that what matters is not where someone comes from, but where they choose to go and who they choose to become. Thank you for that lesson. I pray that God blesses you and keeps you all the days of your lives. With deepest respect and regret for my past actions, Reverend Jonathan Carstairs. Willa set down the letter, her eyes wet. Nathan reached over and took her hand. He learned, Nathan said quietly. That's worth something. It is worth a great deal, Willa agreed. She looked around at her family, Nathan beside her. Noah, now a young man of 17 with his father's build and serious demeanor, Grace at 14 already beautiful and fierce, Samuel at 5 still small enough to climb into laps but growing every day. We are blessed, more blessed than I ever imagined possible. We are blessed because we chose each other, Nathan said, because we had the courage to walk away from people who would not accept us and build something better. More years passed. Noah married a trapper's daughter named Sarah, a capable woman who fit into their mountain life as if she had been born to it. They built their own cabin a day's ride from Nathan and Willa's place, close enough to help, but far enough to establish their own independence. When they had their first child, a daughter with Noah's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes, Willa held her grandchild and marveled at the continuation of the life she and Nathan had built. Grace surprised them all by declaring she wanted to become a teacher. She traveled to Portland, the city Willa had fled decades earlier, and attended a training program for educators. When she returned 2 years later, she established a small school in Kennewick, teaching children who had previously received no formal education. She never married, but she built a life of purpose and satisfaction, visiting the mountain cabin regularly and bringing books for Samuel and later for Noah's children. Samuel grew into a young man who had his father's love of the wilderness, but also an artist's soul. He carved and painted, capturing the beauty of the mountains in ways that took Willa's breath away. When a merchant from Fort Vancouver saw his work, he offered to sell Samuel's pieces in the city, and suddenly their youngest child had a career that bridged the mountain isolation and the wider world. Nathan and Willa grew old together in their cabin, their bodies slowing, but their love only deepening with time. They had been married 35 years when Nathan finally admitted that the years of hard mountain living were catching up with him. His joints ached in cold weather, and the trap lines that had once been easy had become difficult. "I think it is time to pass the work to younger hands," he told Willa one winter evening as they sat by the fire. He was 61, she was 57, and they had earned their rest. "What will you do with your time?" Willa asked, though she already knew. "Help with the grandchildren. Work on the cabin, there are always improvements to be made. Maybe travel down to see Grace's school. Spend time with you without always worrying about trap lines and hunting and all the work that never ends." "That sounds perfect," Willa said. They entered this new phase of life with the same grace they had brought to everything else. Noah took over most of the trapping, though Nathan still helped when his body allowed. They spent long winter days sitting by the fire, reading and talking, and simply enjoying each other's company. In summer, they worked in the expanded garden, played with their growing collection of grandchildren, and took slow walks through the forests they knew better than any map could show. On their 40th anniversary, Willa suggested they visit the meadow one final time. The climb was harder than it had been 10 years earlier, their bodies protesting the steep trail, but they made it. The meadow looked exactly the same, wildflowers in bloom, the creek singing over stones, mountains rising on all sides. 40 years, Nathan said, his voice rough with age and emotion. 40 years since I married you in this place." "Best decision you ever made?" Willa teased, though she knew the answer. "The only decision that matters," Nathan confirmed. He pulled her close, and despite his silver hair and the lines on his face, she still saw the young mountain man who had stood on church steps and refused to let her be shamed. "I would do it all again, Willa. Every moment, every hardship, every triumph, all of it, as long as it led me to you." "I love you," Willa said. "I loved you when you married me under this sky, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They stood in that meadow holding each other, two people who had been rejected by polite society and had found something far better in this wild place. The sun moved across the sky, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber, and Willa felt complete. Her life had taken her from privilege to poverty, from innocence to harsh experience, from shame to redemption. But through it all, she had survived. And more than survived, she had thrived. The preacher had refused to marry them because of her past, but Nathan had married her anyway, under God's open sky, and in doing so had given her a future brighter than any she could have imagined. They had built a life together in these mountains, raised children who were strong and good, and loved each other with a constancy that never wavered. As they walked back down the trail toward home, Willa took one last look at the meadow. It would always be sacred to her, this place where her new life had truly begun. The vows they had spoken here had proven truer and more binding than any ceremony in any church, because they had been chosen freely and lived out daily through 4 decades of joy and hardship and unshakable love. That night, back in their cabin with their children and grandchildren gathered around for a celebratory dinner, Willa looked around the table and felt her heart overflow. This was what grace looked like, not perfect, not easy, but real and honest and full of love. This was what redemption meant, not erasing the past, but building a future so bright that the past lost its power to define her. Nathan caught her eye across the table and smiled, and in that smile, Willa saw everything they had been and everything they had become. They had been refused by a preacher, rejected by a town, but they had found something far more valuable in these mountains and in each other. They had found home. Years later, when Nathan and Willa were both in their 70s, they spent their days mostly in the cabin, content to let the world come to them rather than going out to meet it. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, and the cabin that Nathan had built for one person now overflowed with family whenever everyone gathered. One autumn evening, as the aspens turned gold outside their window and the first chill of winter touched the air, Nathan and Willa sat together in the chairs he had made 47 years earlier. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Willa was mending while Nathan carved a toy horse for one of their many grandchildren. "Do you ever think about that day at the church?" Nathan asked suddenly. Willa looked up from her sewing. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I want you to know that I have never, not for one moment, regretted what happened. If Reverend Carstairs had married us that day, we might have stayed in Kennewick. We might have built a normal life in town, and it probably would have been fine. But we would have missed this." He gestured around the cabin at the life they had built. "We would have missed the freedom and the beauty and the depth of connection that comes from building something together from nothing." "I know," Willa said softly. "I used to be bitter about that day, about the humiliation and the rejection. But over time, I came to see it as a gift. It forced us to choose each other completely, to commit without the safety net of community approval. It made our marriage stronger because we only had each other to rely on." "And we were enough," Nathan said. "We were more than enough." Willa set down her mending and moved to sit on the arm of Nathan's chair, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You showed me that I was worth loving, Nathan. After everything I had been through, after all the ways the world had told me I was damaged and worthless, you saw me and loved me anyway. You gave me back my life." "You gave me mine," Nathan countered. "I was half alive up here before you came, going through motions, surviving but not really living. You brought color and warmth and meaning back into my world. We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the wind in the pines outside. Willa thought about the girl she had been in Salem, the woman she had been forced to become in Portland, the frightened person who had stepped off a stagecoach in Kennewick hoping to disappear. She thought about standing on those church steps, hearing the reverend's condemnation, feeling shame burn through her entire body. And then she thought about Nathan taking her hand, about riding away from that judgment, about speaking vows in a mountain meadow under an endless sky. She thought about every moment since the struggles and triumphs, the children born and raised, the life built log by log and day by day. "Thank you," she whispered to Nathan. "For what?" "For refusing to let that preacher define what we could be. For knowing that God's blessing did not require a building or a ceremony. For loving me enough to marry me under the open sky." Nathan pulled her into his lap, holding her as carefully as he had held their newborn children. That meadow was holier than any church, and our vows were truer than any words a preacher could have spoken. We pledged ourselves to each other with nothing but mountains and sky and God as witnesses, and we kept those promises every day since. That is marriage, Willa. Not papers or ceremonies, but choice and commitment and love that endures. Willa rested her head on Nathan's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. This man had been her salvation, her partner, her great love. He had given her children and a home and a life worth living. But more than that, he had given her back herself, had shown her that her worth was not determined by her past, but by her character and her choices, and the love she gave to the world. As darkness fell outside and the fire burned low, they remained entwined in that chair, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that finding. The preacher had refused to marry them, had judged Willa unworthy of blessing. But Nathan had known better. He had married her anyway, under God's open sky, and in doing so had proven that real love, the kind that changes lives and redeems souls, needs no permission from anyone but the two hearts that choose each other. That truth had sustained them through 47 years of marriage, would sustain them through however many years remained. They had built their life on a foundation of mutual choice and unshakable commitment. And nothing, not prejudice, not hardship, not the passage of time had been able to shake it. In the end, being refused at that church had been the greatest gift. It had forced them to create their own ceremony, speak their own vows, build their own understanding of what marriage meant. And what they had built was stronger and truer than anything handed to them could have been. As Willa drifted toward sleep in Nathan's arms, she smiled. She had been the woman no preacher would marry, the woman deemed unfit for respectability and grace. But she had found something far better than respectability. She had found love without conditions, partnership without judgment, and a life richer than any she could have imagined in her darkest Portland nights. Nathan had married her under God's open sky, and under that same sky they had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told about the mountain man and his bride, in the cabin that stood as testament to what two people could create when they refused to let the world define their worth. That was enough. That was everything. And as the fire finally guttered to embers and the stars emerged brilliant overhead, Willa Brooks fell asleep knowing she was exactly where she belonged, held by the man who had always seen her true worth and loved her with a constancy that proved grace was real and redemption was possible, and love could heal even the deepest wounds. The mountain stood silent around them, witness as always to the life they had built in its shadow. And if mountains could speak, this one might have said that 47 years ago it had watched a couple speak vows in a flower-filled meadow, and in all the time since, it had never seen a truer marriage or a deeper love. The preacher had refused them, but the mountain had accepted them, and that had made all the difference.